Good evening, everyone. On this last Tuesday, Monday evening of the year, remember, we should keep on thinking how precious these days are. Could be masakin all the Monday evenings of the year with this Monday evening. And certainly the time we spend learning Torah is greatly used time, which is invested for nitzchias, forever and ever. Ashrei mi sheba l'kan v'talmuda biyadai, person that comes to the next world with Talmud in his hand is very, very fortunate, and the whole family is fortunate. We thank our sponsors, and what happened to my sponsor sheet? Baruch Ian, Lila Nishmas Yaakov Chaim Ben Abba, Esther Bas Gittel, Avram Ben Shmuel HaKayin, Yaakov Yumansky with our Karsa Tov to the Rav and the Zoom family, and Nachas from children and grandchildren, Abi Spry, who is now in Eretz Yisrael, for Nachas from children and grandchildren, Ed Saleh from London, Joshua Rosenberg of Ritual Talmud, and Lila Nishmas, Shalom Fogel, Lila Nishmas from Yaakov Zeb and Yehuda Aryeh, Rivka Bas Yaakov Yosef, Tivya Miriam Bas Gad, Yosef Ben Sion Ben Yaakov Zev. The Neshamas should have an aliyah. I believe that today was the yahrzeit of Sar Shalom Mibels, whose Torah we quote a lot in these shiurim, especially when it comes to Haggadah Shel Pesach. His Neshamas should have an aliyah. He should be a Meltz Yosher for all of Klal Yisrael. We are holding. So if you remember, we said that we're holding on the bottom line of Daf Tzadik Chesam Beis, and I should welcome in Saba and Irving Fishbaum, Shelley Zeitlin, Mark Frankel, Elliot Udell, Ruvain Pollack, Marshall Castle, Mel Zachter, Menachem Umansky, Mo Kushner, Dr. Guy, Yitzi Fuchs, Aaron Swade, Dr. Black, Michal, Shalom Fogel, Nachman Chaplin, Moshe Lehman, Elia Shutman, Yeshua Shmuel Eisenberg, Avram Rezepkowitz, Rabbi Kranz, Naftali Jablin, Itzi Muller, and David Helfgott on Kol Lashon here in the shul. We have the very big pleasure of having with us Berish Gesserman, Chaim Kramer, Rich Lenner, and Michal Avram, Ruvain Shanet. It's great to have all of you joining us. Really, 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 really great. So if you remember, we said that there were kruvim that were next to the Aron on the ground, and they went up 10 amas. So it says that in one pasuk it says that the height of the Kodesh Kodashim was 30, like the rest of the temple complex, and in one case it says 20. So they asked Rabbi Hanina when he went out to the villages to reconcile that contradiction, and he said that the pasuk that says 20 is from the tip of the wings of the kruvim that was standing on the floor. So the Gemara says, "My kamash malon." What is the lesson in that? Says the Gemara, "Hakamash malon," that lamata kilamala, that below is like above. Mala mala ein mishamish klum, just like the upper 20 amas of the ear space of the Kodesh Kodashim is not used for anything. Aflamata, so also below Ein mishamish klum. It's not used for anything. So you'll say, what do you mean it's not used for anything? The Aron Kodesh was there. Says the Gemara, Messiah le Rav Levi, the Amar Rav Levi, the Isay Rav Yochanan, for Rav Levi says, and others say, Rav Yochanan, this is a famous Gemara in Megillah, in Yuma, Davar zeh Mesiris b'yadeinu me'avriseinu. This we have a tradition from our ancestors. Now this is from the first temple. And in the first temple, there was a remarkable miracle. That Mokam Oraim ukruvim einay min amid. The Aron and the Kruvim took up no space. It's a remarkable thing. Tanya Namihachi. Aron she'asa Moshe. Now remember, the dimensions of the Kodesh Kodashim was 20 by 20, 20 long and 20 wide. It was a square. And it says, if you measured Aron she'asa Moshe yesh lo revach eser amas l'kol ruach v'ruach. There were 10 amas on either side of the Aron Kodesh. Now, if the whole room was 20 by 20, and there was 10 amas on each side of the Aron, where was the Aron? So we see that the Aron was Eina min Amida. It didn't take up any space, although we know for sure that the Aron had dimensions. The Torah says that the Aron had dimensions, right? But it didn't take up any space, and the Aron was 2.5 by 1.5 amas. So if it was 2.5 by 1.5 amas, so where did it sit? If it was 20 by 20 and it had 10 amas on either side of it, so where was it? Now we have to understand, and this is something that we need to appreciate as we welcome in Gedalia Engel, and we welcome in Avram Shenkman that just joined us. Both Gedalia and Avram, we need you down here. It's nice to have you there, but we need you down here. We know, I am aware that there is a lot of traffic outside and gridlock. I know. When Gedalia can come, he comes. I know.
Parking in that neighborhood, you can't get through.
No, Gedalia had a little bit of a surgery on his foot, so he's a little tender on his foot, and he's preserving it because he lanes for us, and so the president whipped him into shape, But anyway, so let's talk about this for a second. The Rabbeinu Shalom never likes to make miracles. He likes to run everything b'derech hateva. Now, if you stop to think, La Hashem ha'oretz u'maloya, the whole world belongs to Hashem. He didn't have real estate for his Aron Kodesh. I mean, what's the idea to make a miracle that the Aron Kodesh is sitting in the Kodesh Kodashim and is not taking up any space? What's the message of that miracle? And the message of that miracle is a very powerful one. And that is that Hashem is showing us that true Torah survives shaloi kederach hateva. True Torah survives in a completely unnatural way. And people that have been around the block, they see this. I mean, you see families in Eretz Yisrael where the father is sitting and learning 12 hours a day. 12 hours a day. And they have 11 children. And they're surviving. They're surviving. Torah Lishma, when a person learns Torah Lishma, it exists Shaloi Kederech HaTeva. Here you have a couple, an American couple. He's a foot surgeon, and she's a lawyer. And they make a decision that they can't have a second child because they can't afford it. This is not, you hear this. They can't have a second child, they can't afford it. You have a man who's sitting and learning from the moment he opens up his eyes till he goes to sleep. They have 11 children, 12 children, 13 children. And they're living happy. Even with all the explanations, it's completely Shaloi Kederech HaTeva. And now, I'm not saying that there are people that should be working that aren't. That's a different discussion. I'm not. That's probably true also. But what I am saying is that true Torah l'shem shemayim exists Shaloi Kederech HaTeva, and that's the idea of this miracle that the Aron is Eina Min Midah. Otherwise, why would the Rebbeinu Shalom make such a miracle? It doesn't make sense.
Is this the Aron that Tzala made?
Yes.
So it was a physical.
Of course, it was physical. It's true with the Aron that Betzalel made. That Aron was hidden. And it's true also of the Aron that Shlomo HaMelech made in the first temple. The second temple didn't have an Aron. It was hidden. Says the Gemara, there's another miracle. Amar Rav Noi, Amar Shmuel, Kruvim b'neisar ein oimden. The actual body of the Kruvim were also miraculous. Because at this point, the Gemara is assuming that the Kruvim, they were next to each other in a line on the Aron. Shenema v'chomesh amos knaf hakruv ha'achas. The 5 amos was one wing of a kruv. The chomesh amos knaf hakruv ha'shniya. And 5 amos the other wing. Eser amos miknei knofav v'ad ktsei knofav. So the wing spread of one kruv from one wing to the other was 10 amos. And then next to it was another kruv with a wing spread of 10 amos. Now, assuming that the Gemara assumes right now that the wings came out from the side of their bodies, so therefore you had in the wing spread 20 amos, that takes up the full width of the Kodesh Kodashim. So where did the bodies stay? Gufayu heicha v'kaimei. Where did the bodies stay? Alishma mina b'nei seinaimdim. We see that they stayed, they existed in a miraculous, they didn't take up any space. Now the Gemara is going to ask 6 questions to disprove this idea. But before we come to the 6 questions, again, what would be the idea that the Kruvim b'nei seinaimdim, that the body of the Kruvim were miraculous? Now, why should Hashem not leave room for the bodies of the Kruvim? The same question. So you have to know that the Kruvim, which Rashi tells us are Keruvia, they're the form of a boy and a girl. The boy and the girl sitting on top of the Aron, which contained the Luchas and the Torah, represents the teaching of Torah to school children. And that's what we have in the Holy of Holies. What's Holy of Holies by us is, as it says, Ein ha'oila miskayim ela b'shvil hevel tinoike shel beis rabban. The world only exists because of the learning of school children. And again, it's telling us that the payment that we make for tuition, which it really is unnatural. You take a family of 6 children and they pay enormous amounts of tuition money. It doesn't seem possible. That's tuition money before taxes. It doesn't seem possible. But it says that the money spent on the tuition of our children is einam in a minion. It doesn't come out from the yearly budget, which means that it too is miraculous. Now, the Gemara, however, says that it's not really conclusive that it's a miracle. Maskul Abaya, Vidilma Bolton Kitanagolan Avekaime. Maybe the wings came out from the middle of their bodies, so that the body was absorbed in the ring spread, and it wasn't besides the wing spread. That's one way to look at it, and then it wouldn't be miraculous. Maskava Rava Vidilma Zeshaloi Keneged Zeavekaime. Maybe they weren't alongside each other, but they were staggered. If you look in the art scroll has a picture in note 5, how they were staggered, and they're not one right next to each other, but they overlapped. So therefore, it's not a question. Maybe they didn't go along the length, but they went on a diagonal. Now, if the length and the width is 20, so the diagonal is more than that, right? That's the Pythagorean theorem, right? The diagonal, what is it, 1.8? If the side of the square is 1, the diagonal is 1.8, no? Right, it's 1.8, no? Anybody know? Where's all our mathematicians?
I believe so.
Ruvain, that's not the Pythagorean theorem?
Yeah.
1.412.
It's not 1.8?
But that, you're talking about
The diagonal.
no, x squared plus y squared is c squared, that's what that means.
What is it, Shelley?
The square root of 2, 1.4, what Dr. Block said.
Okay, thank you. 1.4. Okay. Masker of Hunabraid Rabbi Yeshua, Vidilma Beisa mi loy ravach. If you remember, we learned that the measurement of the interior could be narrower in the bottom and wider on top, because they made the width of the walls thicker on the bottom. So maybe there's more room on top, and therefore, as it rises, because the Kruvim was sitting on top of the Aron, maybe there was more than 20 by 20. Maskevler Apapa, Vidilma Mechef Havikaife Yadayu. Maybe their wings were bent. They weren't spread all the way out, but they were bent in. And therefore it didn't take up, it wasn't a full wing spread. Masker of Ashi, Vidilma Shalchufe Ave Mishalchefe. This is the last question. Maybe the wings were completely crossed, like somebody clasping their hands. They were crossed in, and therefore it didn't take up a spread at all. So maybe it wasn't a miracle. Now, were they facing each other? Were they facing towards the front of the Beis Hamikdash towards the east. So there's a contradiction in the pasuk. Keitzad ein Eimden. Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Elazar. Chadam apneim ishal achiv. They faced each other. The Chadam apneim labayis. They faced towards the front, towards the kodesh, towards the east. Now the pasuk says both. It says pneim ishal echav, ishal achiv, and it says pneim labayis. So that's a contradiction. So ulaman diyama pneim ishal achiv, that they faced each other. I hoksiv upneim labayis. They faced the front. Says more like kasha kambas man she Yisrael oisim etzayim nishal makam. When Klal Yisrael did the will of the Creator, then they were facing each other. Kambas man she ein Yisrael oisim etzayim nishal makam. Then they weren't facing each other; they were facing the front. Now, a big part of doing etzayim nishal makam is when there's achdus by Klal Yisrael. Now, you have to understand that parents derive tremendous pleasure when their children get along. If children are not getting along, it's a very big distress to the parents. And the Rebbeinu Shalom is the same way. Rebbeinu Shalom is the same way. When Klal Yisrael are not getting along, there's a lot of infighting and a lot of strife, then the Rebbeinu Shalom is very unhappy. So, Bizman Shi Yisrael Oisim B'Tzayim Nishal Makam, that's when they're getting along. I told you, and this is a good thing to talk about before Rosh Hashanah, we all have our family units. So, I told you, and you'll forgive me if you remember this, but it's good to review it. The great tzaddikim wrote ethical wills before they passed away. Not the traditional tzava where they say who's supposed to get the shas and who gets the kais, and who gets the cow. An ethical will is where they left from their knowledge of life, they leave wisdom and also understanding. A parent understands the special temptations of their children, so they leave ethical wills. We have a collection of ethical wills. As a matter of fact, in the side compartment of the Svarim Shank in the back, there's a 2-volume set of Svarim in Hebrew of a collection of ethical wills of Gedolei Yisrael. I don't keep it out because somebody gave it to me as a present, but it has a blue cover and the dye is fading on the cover, and whenever you put it down, it gets all over whatever you're doing. So you got to really, if you want to use it, you got to put on gloves, and you got to. But it is a worthy read. So, for example, Rav Miller left an ethical will to his family, and in Rav Miller's ethical will was a very interesting thing. He asked his family that they should talk at home only in Yiddish. Now, that's an interesting ethical will. But Rav Miller determined that if the children would learn Yiddish, they wouldn't be tempted with much of the technology and much of the reading and much of the watching, because they only speak Yiddish. So you see, in one sweep, that's an ethical will. It's an ethical will of Rav Shamshon Raphael Hirsch. This is, you could Google it and check it up. It's really nice to print out and give it to the family. It's a gorgeous ethical will. In the ethical will of Rav Shamshon Raphael Hirsch, he writes that he wrote it after his wife passed away. So he said, with the passing of your mother, I begin to think about my own mortality. He says, if I think what I could ask from you, he says it wouldn't be fair that I should ask you to be good Jews, because there's no reason for me to believe that you won't be. That's what he writes. He says, one thing I ask you, one thing. Invariable in the course of life, one of you is going to upset the other. I'm asking you for the benefit of Mommy and I to forgive and get past it. Because how could Mommy and I have nachas in Gan Eden if our children are not getting along? He says, this is the only thing I ask for my children. It's mamish, it's, and this is Hinei ma'toiv u'manoim sheves achim gam yochad. So, to get back to our Gemara, when they are looking at each other, that's when we're oisin ritzaynei shamakim. Well, according to the Mandiyama, that they faced the front to the east, they looked at each other. It says the Gemara, they faced front, but on an angle. So they also looked at each other also. Their heads were turned on an angle. And the Gemara says, the Tanya Unkelus Ger Amar, Unkelus the Ger, said, Kruvim Maisei Tzatsuim. The Kruvim were formed like youths, like children. Umitzadidim Pneim, and their faces were at an angle, Kitalmid Anifta Merabbi, like a Talmud that's walking away from his Rebbe. A Talmud that walks away from his Rebbe, he doesn't turn his back on his Rebbe, but he doesn't walk completely backward, he'll fall on his head. So he turns on an angle. Now, says the Gemara, and let's remember, Rabbi say to learn to be Mekayim the mitzvah of Dibar Tabam, Lasois Nachas Ruach Liyotzreinu. Now, Mi sheyesh leibar lifnim mibeisei shel chaverei. Now, what happens over here is that Marshall has a rights to use a well that's in Shalom's house. Here Shalom thought that everything was going okay, and now he finds out that Marshall could traipse into his house every day. It's enough.
Oh boy!
It's enough for Shalom to move to Boynton Beach. Yeah. So right. So the first thing is, Marshall, you can't come in the night. Nichnes b'shah shedach b'nei adam nichnasim. You could come in when people come in. V'yaitze b'shah shedach b'nei adam yaitze. And you leave when people leave. No coming into the house in the night. Also, one day, Shalom finds in his house an ox. Marshall brought the ox into the house. No, Marshall. Ve'enoi machnis behemtai umashke mebayrai. You can't bring in the ox through Shalom's living room. Ela mamala, you fill a bucket, umashke mebechutz, and you give your ox to drink outside. Now this is very interesting. V'zeh oiseloi pasachas, v'zeh oiseloi pasachas. Each one puts a lock on the bar. Now I understand why Marshall puts a lock on the bar, because he doesn't want Shalom pilfering his water, right? So that we understand. But why does Shalom put a lock on the bar? So the Gemara is going to explain, Shalom puts a lock on the bar because he doesn't want Marshall coming in the house when he's not home. Then people will talk about Marshall and Mrs. Fogel. We don't need that. So therefore, he puts a lock there so Marshall can't come in when he's not there. So the Gemara says, Pesachas lehecha. Where is the lock? Amar Rabbi Yochanan shneim lebar. Both on the pit. Bishleim balabar. We understand why Marshall has the lock. Boilish tamurei ma'ayid bare. He wants to make sure that Shalom doesn't have sticky fingers. Ela balabayis lamalei. Why does Shalom put it on? Amar Rabbi Lazar mishum chshad ishtay. Now, by the way, that doesn't mean that anybody suspects anybody of anything. But it's not good for Marshall to be in the house with a married woman when Shalom is not around, because then people would start talking. And therefore, Shalom has a lock, so Marshall will not come in the house until he makes sure that Shalom is home.
So apparently the bar must be seen from the outside then.
What do you mean?
If the bar is locked and the house is open and he doesn't know it's locked until he goes into the house, then he's going to go in the house and see the bar is locked.
No, he makes sure, he asks Shalom when you're going to be home. That's all.
So why does he need a lock on it then?
He needs a lock on it because if there's no lock, he's not going to ask Shalom when he's going to be home.
But he won't know if it's locked up until he
No, it's always locked up.
Oh.
It's always locked up. Now, you're not around people like Marshall long enough. Now.
We're just not all that lucky, what can I say?
Yeah, right. It's like an Italian sausage. Now, Mi sheyesh legina lifnim miginasei shel chaveira. Here, what happens is Marshall has a garden within Mark's garden. The only way that Marshall could get to his garden is to traipse through Marshall's garden. Now he bought the right of way from Mark to get to his garden. So that doesn't give him the right to go in the night. That's all Mark needs. Nichnas b'shasha derech b'nei adam nichnasim. He could come when people come. V'yoytze b'shasha derech b'nei adam yoytzim, and leave when people come. In the day, Marshall, in the day. Not only that, Marshall can't bring in through Mark's garden a bunch of customers to buy his stuff. You can't, all of a sudden, Mark looks, and 16 people are traipsing through his garden. Says, no way, Jose. He can't bring merchants, and he also can't come through Mark's garden to take a shortcut to another one of his fields. He only has the right of way to come in, to go into the garden. Now Mark could plant small vegetables on the path because it's his land, just he allows Marshall to traipse through it. However, if with the agreement of both of them, even though it makes Marshall go out of his way, because he has to go all the way around the perimeter of the field to get to his garden. But if they both agree that Marshall is going to come around the perimeter of the field without penetrating inside the field, then Marshall could use it even in the night. Nichnas b'shashu raitze, he could come when he wants. V'yaitze b'shashu raitze, he could even bring customers. Or machnes l'seicha tagar, because he's going all the way around the perimeter of the field. However, still v'lo yikanis m'seicha l'seich ste'acheres, he still can't use it as a shortcut. And in this case, zev ze'ein on rashayin l'zayir, since it's not in the body of the garden, even Mark can plant this exterior pathway. Now, I'm Rabbi Yehuda, I'm a Shmuel. I'm a beis hashlochin ani meichelach. If, let's say, Mark tells Marshall, I'm selling you a irrigation canal. I'm selling you that you could direct a canal through my field to get to your field. So, noisen loy beis amos l'seicha, it has to have an interior width of 2 amos. Now you'll ask, if it's interior width of 2 amos, then why is it called an amma? Why is it called an amma? Why is the canal called an amas amayim? If it's 2 amos, why is it called an amas amayim? Marsha, you get the question?
Makes sense to me, right?
So it's a very big question. And the answer is that the amma is talking about the depth. It's an amma deep. It's very interesting. According to this Gemara, you usually assume that an amma is an amma wide, right? But here, the way the Gemara is saying it is it actually is 2 ammas wide, but it's an amma deep. And Marshall also gets amma mekan va'amma mekan la'agfer, an amma on either side for its banks. Now we're going to see in the maskana of the Gemara over here, this means that Mark can't build anything along that amma on either side. It has to be left for the bank of the canal. Amma beis hakiloin ani meichelach. However, if Mark sells to Marshall an amma to bring water, not to irrigate his field, but only for a pool of water where he's going to wash his laundry or give to drink his animals, then noisin loy amma achas l'seicha, then it has only the width of 1 amma, v'chatzi amma mekan v'chatzi amma mekan l'agfer, and a half an amma on either side for its banks. Now, the banks, who plants them? Now remember, this is Mark's property. Says the Gemara, v'oisan agfayim, these banks, mi zayram, Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel, balasada zayram. Mark plants them. Rav Nachman Amar Shmuel, balasada noitam. Mark could only plant trees there. Trees, the roots go down. They won't invade the canal. Manda Amar Zayram plants them, kol shechei noitam. But a Mandi Amar noitam plants them, avol Zayram loy. But he can't plant trees. He can only plant trees, but not seeds, because the seeds, chilchule mechalchale, their roots, shallow roots, will go to the side and they'll invade the walls of the canal. V'amar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel, amas hamayim shekalu agfer, the canal, if its walls collapse, misakna ma'isa sad, you could fix it from Mark's field. Why? Because we assumed if they collapsed, the earth collapsed into Mark's field. B'yadua shaloi kalu agfer ba'isa sad. So our Papa says that's not true. And Mark will say right away, it's not true. Maybe the water swept away the earth when it collapsed. The water swept it away. Maybe the water swept away the earth. No, when Mark sells Marshall the canal, or whether for irrigation or for a pool, Shalmanas came kibul alav balasada. Part of the deal was that if it collapses, Marshall could take the earth from Mark's field to rebuild the canal. Now, Mishai sederach harabim oiveres l'seich sadeh. If, let's say, passing through Marshall's field was a public path. Now, either that means that before Marshall bought the field, there was already a public path there, or Marshall, being a real good guy, ceded from his property to the public. Now, Marshall decided, you know what? I hate this, that the public is traipsing through my middle of my property. So he diverted the path and put it to the side. Not loving nosan lahem min atzad. Says the Gemara, we throw the book at him. Don't try to, Marshall, don't try to take away something from the public. Mashe nosan, the new path he gave them, they got. V'shaloi lo higiyu, he doesn't get back the one in the middle. Now, derech hayochid, a private path, that's daled amas. Private path is 4 amas, that's enough for a wagon to go. Derech harabim is 16 amas, is 16 amas. Derech hamelech, if the king is coming with his entourage, ein lo shir. It has no amount, and melech pirates get it, the king could knock down fences and knock down walls in order to go. Derech hakever, if a funeral procession comes, ein lo shir, they're not allowed to knock down walls, but they could go even in private places. Hamaimed, if, let's say, Marshall buys a area where there will be held the funeral procession after the burial. We'll learn in the Gemara what they did after the burial. If this means the shura, when they're comforting. But if he bought a place, they didn't have, in those days, big Beis HaKfaros with place, so people had their own family places. So Dainei Tzipore Amru, the judges of Tzipore said, if one buys a maimed, it has to be the area of our base Arba Kavin, 4 Kavin. Now, we said that if Marshall has a path running through his field, and he diverts it to the side, so he said, what he gave them, he can't take back, and what he tried to take back is not his. So the Gemara says, why? Why? If he gave them a replacement, then why can't he get back the original path? And if they come, Lindkite Parzel, let him hold a crowbar in his hand. You know, Marshall, he's not he's not shy. You know, Lindkite Parza, let him take a, you know, like Little John had this big staff. Let him take a big staff for Lasev and whop somebody that tries to come, right? Why do you think they call him a whopper? Says the Gemara, Shma Mina, can we deduce from here that even if people try to take what's yours, you're not allowed to take the law in your own hands? Can we deduce Shma Mina that lo yovid inish dino l'nafshe? A person can't take the law in his hands. Afilu b'makom seida, even where they want to invade his privacy and cause him harm. Says well, no. Amra Azvid Mishmei de Rava, we don't let Marshall make a swap. We're afraid that Marshall won't make a fair trade, and he'll give them a crooked, circuitous path instead. So we don't let him switch. No, where do we say he doesn't get the old one? That's talking about where he gave them a circuitous route. Rav Ashi says you can't divert it because it's always going to be circuitous for someone. Right? That's always the problem. If you relocate a shul, it's going to be closer to somebody and further to another person. Right? It's always something that we deal with here with realization in fairways. If we were ever to buy a house and relocate the shul, so it's going to make some people happy and some people sad. It's going to be closer to some people and further to others. So therefore, that's why you can't replace the path marshal, because kol min hatzad, if you try to divert it, derech hakalosani, it's going to be crooked for somebody. Kroiv l'zeh, it'll be closer to some people, but urechayka l'zeh, it'll be further for other people. Now, tomorrow we'll say, so if he can't take away the old one, why can't he take back the new one? So we'll discuss that tomorrow. Remember that tomorrow is the last shir of Tafshin Pei Dalet. That's really something. It's not going to be the last shir that I'm going to be giving, but it's going to be the last shir that I'm going to be doing on Zoom. I will do on Erev Yom Tov Mishnah Yomis. Okay, now we're going to learn the Mishnah Yomis.